Welcome to How They Won. I'm your host, Bob Burns, and every week I get successful real estate professionals across North America to share their secrets of success with you. With the current COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to have a conversation about the baseline economic factors that are at play. I am lucky to have a friend who is both an economist and a real estate professional, so I invited her on the show. Meghan O'Brien is a top-producing real estate salesperson with RE/MAX Concepts in Des Moines, Iowa, and professor of economics with the Des Moines Area Community College. During our conversation, Meghan and I discussed the underlying economic factors that drive real estate, no matter the market, good sources of data to help you make your own decisions about COVID-19's effect on your local real estate market, the data points that are perhaps given too much weight in the overall economic conversation, what Meghan is doing differently in her business during the pandemic, along with several other timely and impactful thoughts for real estate professionals. Remember to take care of yourself so you can take care of others. Stay informed, not inflamed, and put the energy out into the world that you would like to receive back. Thanks for listening. Let's start the show. This week's episode is brought to you by Leaders Edge Coaching. Full disclosure, I am a trainer and a coach with Leaders Edge. But like you, I can choose to do business with anyone. But I choose to work with Leaders Edge. Leaders Edge has the right experience, knowledge, and tools to help you take your business to the next level. Whether that means closing more transactions, or improving your work-life balance, or building a team the right way, the coaches and staff at Leaders Edge can help you achieve your goals. For more information, email coaching@howtheywon.com. That's coaching@howtheywon.com. As I've often said on the show, I feel blessed to have worked with and to know a lot of incredible real estate professionals. Today's guest is certainly no exception. In addition to being someone I really respect, I'm lucky to call her a friend. Before she got into real estate, my guest was a loan officer, a commercial fisherwoman, a state public health divisional director, and chief of spirits distribution for the state of Iowa. She studied economics and political science at Loras College and got her MA and an ABD PhD in economics from George Mason University. She works in the Des Moines, Iowa market as a very successful real estate agent and also teaches economics for the Des Moines Area Community College. Meghan O'Brien with RE/MAX Concepts, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me and the really generous introduction.
I could have been more generous, but I thought I would not go on and on. I have a ton of respect for you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. So we've got a lot to discuss pertaining to the current economic situation in the real estate industry and at large during this whole COVID-19 thing. But I want to start with a lighter question because I just learned something new about you. We've been friends for a while, several years now, and I know that you're a dog lover, but I didn't know that you have a dream of one day having a pet cow.
Yes. So it's an ongoing, I've been a vegetarian for the bulk of my adult life, and I have a cow obsession. I've tried to convince my husband to buy an acreage so I can get a pet cow. I have not won that battle thus far, but yes, that is a dream of mine. People send me photos and memes of cows constantly because they know how much I love them.
So is a cow an inside pet or does it stay outside?
It would have to be an outside pet. Currently where I live, the covenants would definitely not allow it. But I could envision a scenario where I had some sort of indoor-outdoor space to gather with my pet.
That's so interesting. Now, can you train a cow? Do they do tricks or is it just to be with a cow? Is that the idea?
I think it's like an emotional support cow. I am finding that during the social distancing, the longing for my emotional support cow has been pretty strong.
All right. So everybody, realtors that are listening, you need to go out and get yourself an emotional support cow. I think that's the key to success in this thing. All right. Enough on the cows. I want to learn more later over drinks maybe, but I'm far too sober for this conversation to go any further at the moment. We've got people listening, Meghan, from all over North America and even some in Europe and Southeast Asia. So we're going to leave the task of trying to forecast the real estate market to the local experts. I always say that trying to, produce some sort of national or international real estate forecast is like producing an international or national weather forecast. Is just impossible. But that being said, what do you see as an economist as the main drivers in your marketplace that you're watching right now during COVID-19?
Well, some of the things that I watch naturally, I'm still concerned about. So there's positives and negatives, and economics is called the dismal science for a reason. So I'm not going to be a complete Debbie Downer, but by nature, economists tend to have a less rosy outlook, I would say, than the average person. But it's because we spend so much time understanding truly what the economic fundamentals are. So some of the things that I was worried about over the last year and a half are actually a little bit more aggravated by this. So, for example, we have a couple of problems that have driven housing prices in all our markets. We have lower inventory, which is driving up housing prices and really crunching the affordability calculation for a lot of home buyers. So in my local market, our median sales price over the last 3 or 4 years has gone up 20%, while our household incomes have only grown at half that rate. So that affordability gap, which has to do with people's overall income, that's a problem. And we've all seen it in our markets. And depending on the length of this COVID-19 event, we could see that affordability problem get more exacerbated, which could be, even with record low interest rates, could keep people out of the housing market after this event and maybe take another portion of people who would have been buyers and now sideline them to have to wait for another point in which to buy.
That makes sense. I think affordability is one of those metrics that we hear a lot about vaguely, but help us add a little precision to that. How does one calculate or know what the affordability is at a given point in time versus another given point?
Well, the easiest affordability indexes, honestly, are just benchmarking household income growth with the median sales price in your area. It is the simplest affordability index. The nice thing about it is the data is easy to get a hold of, and you can get a hold of it in any market you're in. So in our market, because we've had this rapid growth since 2015, it was already kind of at what I thought could be a tipping point. And now I have some concerns, obviously, that, in the short run, we're not going to see an impact on sales prices, but we may see a more meaningful change in household income before we see a change in price. So I think we're going to have a bit of a chasm there. And when it comes to affordability, and a lot of times we talk about low interest rates, and as someone who teaches economics and have to correct my students' papers when they confuse quantity demanded versus aggregate demand, which is one of the first things you learn in Econ 101, mortgage interest rates drive how much a person is willing to mortgage. It does not determine affordability. So it's the quantity demanded, meaning the amount of money you're willing to borrow. That is where interest rates are pivotal. The affordability has to do with your overall wealth picture and personal well-being.
That's interesting, but I think I need a little bit more help to understand. So a low mortgage interest rate is going to make my payment lower when I'm borrowing the same amount of money. but you're saying it's not directly linked necessarily to affordability.
No, insofar as you might be willing to take out a larger mortgage or up your budget because that payment is lower. So in the sense of your personal budget, yes. But when we talk about affordability in the aggregate, it is a bigger issue. And the idea, everybody's been hearing about record low interest rates for 5 years. The idea that somebody hasn't gotten off the sidelines and gone to buy a house, like they're just waiting for this magical interest rate to show up and suddenly it's going to be affordable for them. That doesn't make sense. It is not new to have low interest rates. And as agents, we're constantly talking about take advantage of these record low rates. So the public knows that, and it makes them less responsive in terms of getting into the market because of that. So it changes the elasticity of the buyer's decision-making to jump in a market. Does that make sense? So if rates were to drop from 6% to 3%, that is the kind of thing that would push people into refinancing and it would bring some new buyers to the market. But at the margin, we're talking about small changes in interest rates at this point of our economic expansion. And so it doesn't have that same driving impact that a large drop would.
That totally makes sense. And getting back to this idea of affordability, I think I know what you're saying, that people are going to borrow a certain percentage of their income from a payment standpoint. So all a lower interest rate does is increases the buying power of someone that was going to buy anyway, rather than driving new people to buy that wouldn't have otherwise considered a purchase. I think that's what you're saying.
That is exactly what I was saying. And that was very well put.
Well, thank you. So affordability is a key point that you're looking at. And I think COVID-19 changes certainly household incomes and further exacerbates an already existing issue. What are some of the other data points that you're watching right now that maybe you weren't paying as close of attention to before 2 or 3 weeks ago that now you think has risen in the priorities of what you look at on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Right. So I'm tracking a couple of things. And one piece of advice I'd give to any agent, particularly if they've got a little more time on their hands than they typically do, is to take a minute. Nobody knows their local community better than real estate agents. And I think even if you are not a data-driven person and you don't instantly know what composition of your local economy is made up of particular sectors of the economy, intuitively, you know that. You know how many doctors and nurses you help buy homes. You know how many teachers. You have an idea how much the restaurant industry or tourism matter to you. So I think what any agent can do is look at your local market and think about who's getting hit the hardest right now. How much exposure your local market has to this. So in my market, I'm obviously looking at unemployment claims. I'm thinking about our big industries and who my clients tend to be and what the impacts are on them. Now, by and large, most of my clients are absolutely going to be fine through all of this. For those clients where I know they're in higher risk places, I've been reaching out to them to potentially talk about refinancing and some of those things. So that's one area where, just knowing your market, you don't have to get into the weeds and the data the way that I do for fun. That's not fun for most people. But taking a second to really understand what the economic base of your market and your clientele is going to go a long way towards you understanding how best to serve your clients and to get a sense of what that's going to look like locally. So, unemployment numbers are starting to come in. They're what we call in statistics or economics, it's going to be a lumpy distribution, meaning every locality is going to be hit differently depending on how reliant they were on certain sectors. So I'm definitely watching that. Now that's on a more aggregate economic level. Within your local board of realtors, depending on what system you use for listings and logging sales, you can also be looking at what I call signs of distress. So things, early indicators. So for example, if houses coming to the market are taking a steady decline, if you're seeing a rapid increase in price decreases, if you're seeing, depending on, I know it's classified in different markets in different ways, but if you're seeing a lot of off market, not canceled or withdrawn canceled listings, it gives you a good sense of what the seller mindset is. And what we're going to be looking at over time. I think it's still too early to really glean anything meaningful from that data. And, I'm not going to theorize about how this turns out, because the truth is there is a whole spectrum of possible outcomes from this. And the sole determinant of where we end up on that spectrum is the duration of this COVID-19 event.
And there's no one is, let's say, predicting the duration, I think, with a ton of accuracy. It sounds like there's some wishes for the duration, but I don't think we've been able to effectively zero in on, how long are we talking about? Are we talking about 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, whatever. So I think you're spot on in that advice. Now, going back to your comment about sectors, I think that's important to drill down on, because different states and municipalities have defined different services as essential versus non-essential. So when you're looking at your local market, Meghan, what I think you're saying is if you look at your client base and you look at what your local municipality or state government has deemed as essential services, and you see a bigger overlap, you see a lot of essential services making up your client base, maybe it means your SOI isn't going to be hit as hard as other realtors with more non-essential members in their SOI. Did I summarize that correctly?
Right. And particularly, areas that rely heavily on tourism and influxes of people. I mean, there is an advantage to living in Iowa. We're not exactly known as a destination that people come to on purpose, except for during presidential campaigns. So generally, for once, that's a benefit for us in that, we're not going to get as hard hit on that front. But yes, and I think you know your sphere, your past clients, and you can be having conversations with them. Now, I personally have always treated my clients as more of a advisor, a financial or economic advisor. That's kind of the role I've taken with them. And so it's very easy for me to call a client and say, hey, you were thinking about listing. How are you feeling about your economic situation? And just kind of walk through their options. If they're nervous about it, maybe refinancing in the short run gives them a little bit more leeway to set them up to buy down the road. And one thing I've always found about housing, and I tell people this, there's never a bad time to buy real estate for someone. There may just be a time where buying real estate isn't the right move for you. Eventually it will be. And there always is a good time to buy real estate, but it's all too often, I feel like we speak in generalizations, and individuals have different needs. They have different concerns about the market. They have different economic situations. So just taking a minute to understand where they're at and meet them where they are and try and find solutions with them, even if it means you're not listing their house this week and you're kind of extending the timeline for that. So I think there's a ton of opportunities in this to build trust with your existing clients who already trust you, but this is just another area where you can further deepen that relationship. And I think that's a great opportunity to come out of all this.
I think that's fabulous advice that is timeless. I mean, that's been a focus of the show, is to try as much as we can to provide timeless advice rather than timely advice. Now, this episode's obviously, pretty high on the timely spectrum, but the timeless thing I just heard you say, Meghan, is that, age old, trainer type script of, how's the market? And the trainer tells you to always say fantastic. That's maybe a more nuanced approach, is to first understand, ask a few questions to the person asking you, why do you ask? What are your goals? What are you looking to do? Are you looking to, move up, move down? What's your situation in life? What's your economic outlook? Before you can really answer that how's the market question, you need to understand a little bit more about where the question's coming from. Great advice.
Exactly.
Let's shift a little bit, because there's a lot of let's say data or information floating around in the national conversation right now. As an economist, Meghan, what, if anything, do you think is missing from our national conversation from an economic viewpoint right now?
That is a very good question. I think there are a few things. I don't fault anybody for this. I think the problem is, just by the very nature of this being so unique and we don't have anything to compare it to, there's a lot of trying to, as people are trying to wrap their head around it, they're trying to point back to previous recessions and say, well, this happened then. Or another, here's a statistic I'm seeing a lot of, that housing prices have gone up in, 4 out of the last 5 recessions kind of commentary. So I think some of what's lacking in our national conversation is honestly, just some humility in going, okay, this has never happened in our lives before. So yes, we can lean on the data, but we also have to recognize that the situation is changing by the day. Last week, it felt like it was changing by the hour, and maybe I'm just consuming less. So now it feels like it's changing day by day. But I think some of that humility and just taking a minute to look around and see, the pain this is inflicting already on people, because realtors are some of the most generous community leaders that I know. And, if you look around and think about it, all the hairdressers are shut down in our market. All the restaurants are closed. There's tons of industries where people are home and honestly worried they may not be able to be in business a month from now. So I think trying to understand more, and yes, I'm very data driven, but the empathy part of me thinks that we need to talk a little bit more about the individuals, because we can get very focused on the aggregate. And Lord knows that in any crisis, if you find a statistic that gives you hope, you are going to lock in on that statistic, whether it pertains to the situation and is accurate or not. And so you get a lot of things flying around in conversation, being shared on Facebook, Twitter by people that aren't necessarily relevant to this situation or particularly helpful for decision making, which is a long way of saying I think we need to focus more on who's being impacted. And generally, they were people who, despite our thriving economy, weren't getting the benefits of the economic growth we were all experiencing anywhere close to the degree that as agents and, other members of our economic community, we were able to experience that in way larger ways than the people who are going to be most directly and adversely affected by this.
I think that's really, really insightful, is to look through the data to the individuals that are being affected by these changing conditions and pay attention to them. What are some things that we should pay less attention to, where, there's too much focus on maybe there's too much focus on GDP, or maybe there's too much focus on employment, or maybe there's too much focus on manufacturing? Is there anything that you think we need to pay less attention to than we are?
Well, you just hit on two of my least favorite economic measures that also happen to be the core of macroeconomics, which is my favorite class to teach. I have long argued that GDP is not a good measure for our economy. For those who don't know and who have decided as soon as they finished their econ course that they never wanted to think about it again, our GDP is a really simple formula. It is private consumption, so all the goods and services Americans consume, plus business investment, plus government spending, and then they subtract our trade balance because we always import more than we export. So that number is always a negative. So our GDP is 67% consumer spending, and then we've got business investment and government spending. Now, as an average American, you probably don't feel GDP. You know, it's not like one day you go into Target. Bad example, since we really can't go shopping, but it's not like one day you go into Target and you spend twice what you normally do and you get home and you're like, oh, wow, GDP went up. That must be why I spent so much more money. So the great thing about GDP is that we've had it as a measure forever. So even though it's not an indicative measure of economic health that I think tells us a great story, it does have value in that it has been consistently not portraying economic activity the same for so long that it serves for trend purposes.
So our ruler, so we're using the same ruler for our entire lives, but the ruler's wrong. But at least it's consistent.
Yep. So how I describe GDP to my students is it's consistently janky. And so we can work with it. On the employment front, and this is where things have gotten really out of whack. So employment, people always think that we have better employment data than we actually do. Our unemployment rate is done by survey. I don't think people realize that. When you live in a day and age where if I tell someone I want a pet cow on your podcast, and then I scroll through Facebook later and I have cow advertisements everywhere, you would assume we had a more detailed way to keep track of our labor force and how many people have jobs and where they're employed, but we use a survey system. The other thing is employment as a measure. So yes, I monitor unemployment claims. That is a real number that we can use. But when we report the unemployment rate, that's not what we're reporting every month. That's not what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is using. They're using a survey. So having said all that, the problem with employment figures is that our economy has structurally changed over the last 20 years. Now it's been a 40-year trend that got more pronounced within 20 years. And in the last decade has just, the whole ground has shifted. So if I have 3 gig jobs, but I would prefer to have 1 full-time job with benefit, I'm not unemployed. I'm working 3 jobs, right? So all these gig people that are working multiple jobs are in this system. That's why I'm not so sure that the unemployment rate, the one that gets reported all the time, is accurately telling us, A, whether people are meaningfully employed in a way that's enhancing their economic wealth, which is what we all want. There is no one in this country that doesn't want everybody to be living better all the time. And so that's a figure. The reports that come out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics at a national level, I don't pay much attention to that at all. I know the stock market does. I know, there are plenty of people that follow that, but I tend to look more locally when it comes to employment by just looking at unemployment claims locally.
Makes sense. Let's shift away from the data a little bit. And I'm curious, Meghan, you last time we talked, your 2020 was starting off really, really strong. I'm guessing you had a ton of stuff in progress when some of the effects of this pandemic started to hit. So what have your clients been asking you over the last several weeks, and what are you telling them?
Well, the clients that are pending, most of them are just in a hurry to get into their new house so they can quarantine in place, in the home they wanted to live in. Those that had a little longer horizon, I mean, I have a lot of buyers right now that are in a holding pattern. The question they're asking me, it's funny, I haven't had a single person ask me if it was safe to go look at homes. So it's not that they're questioning that I could keep them safe, health-wise. They're asking me, does it make economic sense for me to be trying to buy a home right now? What on the seller side, they're saying, if showing activity is down, does it make sense for me to have my house on the market right now? So the questions are really economic. It's not safety. It's not, if we go look at a house, do you have gloves and a mask? Those aren't the kinds of questions that I'm getting. It's honestly about timing. And, I think there's a combination of my clients trust me to give them sound economic advice, but I'm also following their lead. There are going to be people right now who have to buy a house. You've got people going through divorces, you have relocations, you have all these things that still drive housing purchases. And that's a different set of questions, that clients might ask. And that presents a different response for agents. I do not happen to have any clients right now that have to buy in the next 30 to 45 days. So it's been a very easy conversation for us to just take a collective pause.
Makes sense. So let's shift from the short term. And I'm curious, from a medium to longer term perspective, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis, Meghan, and maybe a week-to-week basis, to prepare for the day when the sun rises on a post-COVID-19 economy and a post-COVID-19 real estate market?
Well, honestly, I am living my best real estate life right now because despite the fact that I've been a successful agent, I got into the business. My 5-year anniversary is coming up actually next month. And when I got into the business, I created some of my own systems. I busted my tail. My first calendar year in real estate, I was a rookie of the year. I had a phenomenal first year. My second year, I did not continue the things that built my business. And despite the fact that year over year, my business continues to improve and, probably more than it should have, to be honest, because I was extremely complacent. And I think something that happens with real estate agents is things start to sound like noise. You hear 25 different people tell you need systems. You've got another 30 people telling you to form a team. You've got the mantra of this business is all about relationships. Well, we know it's about relationships, right? And I think sometimes you get into some bad habits by nature of being busy. And I am the first to admit that I did it. And I know that my success is not because I got complacent. It's in spite of that. And so this is such a wonderful opportunity for me to stop and go back to what I did when I was a brand new licensee. And, it served me well. And this is going to be really great. I'm going to have the luxury of time, which means I can get through that to-do list. And then, if I'm in that habit right now, I don't see myself going back in the post-COVID-19 world. I think this is going to force me to recognize I could have been doing this all the time, and I just chose not to.
I think that could be an amazing silver lining to this whole thing is allowing us the time to reset, to focus on what matters and what doesn't matter, and to make some permanent lasting changes that can carry us beyond 2020 into the next 5, 10, 15 years of our careers. And we can all look backwards and kind of thank this weird moment in time for helping us set that foundation underneath our future business. Meghan, you might have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it in a direct way anyway. If you could boil it all down to one or two things right now inside of this COVID-19 pandemic, what is your advice to real estate professionals for what they should be doing right now today?
I would say take your database and instead of prioritizing it by what we all get trained to do is prioritize by our A, B, C, D clients. However, they do that, but they tell you to reach out to your top clients. I actually think this is a really great opportunity to spin that on its head. Definitely reach out to as much of your database as you can, but prioritize the people who are the most vulnerable and need to hear your voice the most. And be the voice of hope and calm and let them know you're thinking about them. Let them talk about what they want to talk about. So that's what I've done. I just literally thought of all my clients who I thought were going to be most affected. And those are the people I called first. Not the people who preferred me the most business, not the people I was happiest, to go to a happy hour with after their. I thought the human connection and the hope the most.
I think that's a fabulous concept and a fabulous idea. And we're going to wrap it up at that. So Meghan O'Brien with Remax Concepts in Des Moines, Iowa. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody listening for everything that you shared. I think there were so many tremendous nuggets in here, and I wish everybody listening good health. Keep yourself well taken care of so you can take care of others. Be informed, not inflamed, and put the energy out into the world that you want to receive back. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week.